No.
We're going to talk a little bit tonight about outlaws and gangsters and the lawmen who follow them. We've got 145 years of Lincoln Parish history to go over in about 40 minutes, so I'm going to have to talk fast. If I leave out your lawman ancestor, I apologize. And if I leave out your outlaw ancestor, I apologize. So we're going to kind of hit the high spot too. We're not going to have time to talk about everybody who really had an impact on Lincoln Parish law enforcement over the last 145 years. Many of you all know that Lincoln Parish was formed in 1873, and at that time we had our first law enforcement officers. The first sheriff was a man named J.B. Ray. He was actually from Chautauqua Parish. He wasn't even a Lincoln Parish resident. The parish had been created by Senator Allen Green, who was referred to as a radical Republican, who named the parish Lincoln basically to spite the local citizens who were mostly Democrat and mostly former Confederates. So he brought this guy in from Chautauqua Parish, and we really know nothing about him other than he served as sheriff for a very short period of time. And there was a lot of controversy and friction between Green, who was trying to control the entire government of the parish by appointing his sons and the Sheriff Ray and others to positions without any kind of elections. Eventually, the Democrats gained more control and was able to push many of these people out and some more local control through elections for local law. Many of y'all know about Robert Rust, who was Ruston's founder. He also served as an early sheriff. We just don't know a whole lot about what happened with these early law enforcement officers in Lincoln Parish and in Ruston. We do know that there were serious crimes on occasion. About the time Lincoln Parish was formed, there was an incident in Vienna where two men had come to town and portrayed themselves as dance instructors. And they would be giving lessons to young women, and there was rumors that they might have been doing more than giving dancing lessons. Anyway, they got into an altercation in a store in Vienna, and a shootout occurred. They shot Dr. Jackson, who was the only physician in Miami at that time, and a storekeeper, and took off out of town, headed south. Well, when we went south back in those days, you ended up in Vernon. So it was a posse that was put together, and they chased these two guys to Vernon, down through Winton Parish, and back then, if you were an outlaw and you were trying to escape the law in northeast Louisiana, you almost always headed to the southwest so that you could cross the Red River and get over into Texas. These guys didn't quite make it that far. They got to about Black Lake, where you had to cross on the ferry to go to Natchez. And the posse cornered and ended up killing one of them. The other one was captured. He was brought back, placed in jail, but he didn't stay in jail very long. It was not unusual back then for the citizens to want really speedy justice, which often meant taking people out of the jail and taking them to the nearest tree and lynching them. And that's what happened in the other guy's case. But that was typical of some of the high-profile cases early on in Lincoln Parish history. When Ruston was formed in 1884, of course, they elected or appointed a town marshal. Sometimes they were called marshals, sometimes they were called the chief of police. Those terms were really interchangeable back then. But in the early days, in Ruston's early days, they didn't seem to be able to keep the police chief for very long. We really don't know who the first chief was, but between 1884, when Ruston was founded, and say 1891 or so, there was about 10 men who held the office of chief of police. It was a very difficult job. You really don't think of Ruston being a rowdy town, but back then there were no alcohol laws, so there were a number of saloons, and there would be a lot of shooting around town at night, going around shooting out store windows and disturbances like that. And some of those men just simply could not handle the job of trying to do something about that. One of the men that was hired to try to deal with that was named John Sizemore. He's the subject of a book I wrote back in the 90s. He was first a deputy United States Marshal, working in the Western District of Louisiana, which was basically everything from the Texas state line to the Mississippi River in North Louisiana. We don't really know much about how he became a U.S. Marshal, but he lived on the Lincoln Parish-Jackson Parish line. The town of Ruston wanted to hire him as a police officer in addition to him serving as a U.S. Marshal, which was not unusual back in those days for a lawman to serve dual roles. He would be a sheriff, a U.S. Marshal, or a city police officer, a U.S. Marshal, or a number of different positions. So they hired him as a part-time police officer for the town of Ruston to do something about the nighttime shootings. Eventually he became the chief of police, and he moved his family to Ruston to a house which was said to be on the outskirts of town. It was where the McDonald's on South Trenton Street is. So that was almost to the woods back in 1996 when he was made police chief. Well, he was always having problems with a particular individual named Frank Mullins, who had grown up in Simsboro and was operating what he called a photography studio in downtown Ruston. This studio was about where Sundown West is now, and that's kind of ironic because really all it was a front for selling whiskey. There was very little photography to it. But Chief Sizemore arrested Mullins numerous times for illegally selling alcohol, both in violating city ordinances and also in violating federal law, because you had to pay taxes if you were producing whiskey legitimately. And so the U.S. Marshals and the revenue officers would go after the steals and whiskey runners because they weren't paying the federal taxes. In one of the cases that Sizemore made on Mullins, his brother-in-law, Sizemore's brother-in-law, who also lived down around the Lincoln Parish, Jackson Parish line, was a witness in the case. I don't know whether this individual, his name was Beatty, whether he was used to make an undercover buy from Mullins or exactly how that happened, but he ended up, he was going to be a witness in federal court against Mullins. One night somebody goes to Mr. Beatty's house. He's sitting at the supper table, right, like I said, the Lincoln Parish line. They stick a shotgun through the window and shoot him in the head while he's eating supper with his family. And the family has always been very graphic in explaining this, that he basically fell dead in his dinner plate. Everybody in the community thought that Frank Mullins or some of his friends were probably responsible for that murder to keep him from testifying. I'm not sure why that was so important, because he'd been convicted many times before, and there really wasn't a great deal of penalty involved in selling alcohol, either through town ordinance or through the federal violations. There were a couple of cases where Mullins and Sizemore exchanged gunfire in confrontations in downtown Ruston. Also, with some other lawmen. There was one man named Spencer Petrie Cobbin, everybody called him Pete Cobbin, who had been either a marshal or deputy marshal in Diana, and also held some offices in Ruston. They had been a police officer at one point. He was a very prominent citizen. He shot at Mullins at one time or another. There was an instance where apparently they got some information that Mullins had whiskey in a safe at his so-called photography studio. So an officer went to the studio and was going to try to seize the whiskey, but it was supposedly in a locked safe. So they pulled the safe out in the middle of what's Park Avenue now and was going to blow it open. That probably would have destroyed the evidence, but to keep them from blowing up the safe, Mullins sat on top of it. You know, so this is obviously drawing a crowd and it's a big spectacle. And Mullins sends for his lawyer, whose name I believe was Halstead, and many of y'all may know there were a series of Halsteads who were attorneys in Ruston over the years. Sent his attorney to the district judge at the courthouse to get an order prohibiting him from opening the safe. And the lawyer was able to get that order, so they were stymied in getting the safe open at that particular time. But I mean, Frank Mullins was a very flamboyant man, liked to wear fancy jewelry, fancy clothes, liked to basically thumb his nose at law enforcement, and very often got away with it. He had enough money, he could afford lawyers when he did get arrested. So this was an ongoing feud between Mullins and law enforcement, particularly with Chief Sizemore. One night in February 1898, Chief Sizemore was on patrol downtown Ruston at late at night, say 8 or 9 o'clock. It was a very stormy night, a lot of lightning, which was very unusual for February. But he was gunfire in the downtown area. So he's walking around trying to find out where the source of the gunfire is coming from. And he encounters Frank Mullins on the corner of Park Avenue and Trenton Street. I'm not even sure what business is on that corner now, but it'd be in front of what was Ruston State Bank. They meet in the street, and through the lightning flashes, they're able to see each other periodically. And Sizemore asks Mullins, "Are you the one doing the shooting tonight?" And Mullins says something like, "By God, I am. What you going to do about it?" So, supposedly, they shoot at each other simultaneously. And Mullins ends up being seriously wounded by Chief Sizemore's shotgun. He limps off to his boarding house, which was just south of the railroad tracks on Diana Street. And the landlady finds him in the front room of the boarding house, and he says, "Go upstairs and look under my mattress and find that my gun is there, so that you can prove that I was unarmed when Sizemore shot me." So she goes up there and finds the gun. They get Mullins up to his room. He lingers through the night and finally dies the next morning after telling his family not to seek retribution, but let the courts handle the situation. Anyway, Sizemore was arrested for murder, and was not unusual back in those days when a lawman killed somebody to be charged and have to go through a trial to vindicate himself. In this trial, which happened in September, so that would be about 6 or 7 months after the shooting, they were able to introduce as evidence cartridges that matched Mullins' gun found street where the shooting, where the gunfire had been heard. Witnesses who said that Mullins was drunk and he was firing his gun that night. Witnesses who said that this pistol that was recovered from under his mattress had mud on it from where it had been dropped in the street. So the jury was convinced that Chief Sizemore did act in self-defense, that all the evidence showed that Mullins was the aggressor in this situation. So the chief was found not guilty. This, like I said, this was in September 1897 or 98. Everybody in the community was convinced that the Mullins family was going to seek revenge against the chief. So in November 1898, Chief Sizemore was leaving his house down on South Trenton Street. He would always at night go back downtown and make a round through the downtown area. And as he walks outside the house, he hears a noise across the street. Like I said, this was right on the edge of the woods, so across the street is basically nothing but a pine thicket, and you can't see very far into this thicket. The chief walks out into the street trying to figure out what this is that he's hearing when he's ambushed and shot with a shotgun. Of course, neighbors hear the gunshots, including the mayor and others, and they come out and find the wounded chief laying in the street, take him into his home, and ask him if he saw anybody, and he never saw his assailant, and he ends up dying during the night. One of the very sad things about this is that his children, and he had, I think at that time, 4 or 5 children, had all written letters to Santa Claus that evening. And he had those in the breast pocket of his coat, and he was shot through that pocket. So all the shotgun pellets went through those letters to Santa Claus that his kids had just written that night and given to him to take downtown in the mail. Nobody was ever charged with that murder. Eventually, a guy in El Dorado supposedly confessed to being paid by somebody to kill Chief Sizemore. He was just fixing to be hanged in Union County, Arkansas for another murder and supposedly confessed. But we don't know any more details than that. But the long-term effects were very evident from this incident. Within a year or so, very tough anti-alcohol laws were passed in Ruston. Basically, you can't have it, you can't sell it, you can't provide it, whatever. And those laws really stayed in place for 75 years. It was not until the early 1970s that the state mandated that 3.2 beer was not really beer, so you had to let people sell it. And that was basically when the door was open to alcohol sales in the area. But prior to that, you couldn't sell it in any shape or form. And that commitment to keeping alcohol out of Ruston was really based on that one incident and what happened. Robert Russ, who by that time had founded Ruston and held a number of different political offices. He was a very prolific writer, wrote letters to the newspapers and so forth. Said that these alcohol laws had completely changed the complexion of Ruston. That families where kids used to go hungry were now being fed because that money was not being spent in the saloons, and that it had a tremendous impact on the future of Ruston. Any questions so far? Or comments?
That was Bobette Banks' great-grandfather. A lot of us knew Bobette, the grandmother of Bobette Banks. She was a knitter at the museum and a very good friend of mine. She used to talk about it, so I thought that might make it, realize who he was, Mr. Sizemore. That Louis Sizemore, remember Louis? Bobette's mother was Louis.
It's kind of interesting in the Sizemore family. Chief Sizemore's father spelled his last name S-I-S, E-M-O-R-E. But some of the children, John Sizemore spelled his the same way, S-I-S. But some of the other kids spell their name S-I-Z. So you've got the same family where some of them over here are S-I-S and some of them over here is S-I-Z. And different spellings of a last name are not unusual because it's not like there's tons of documents and papers laying around the house. There just wasn't anything like it. You didn't get mail from Reader's Digest or wherever had your name, mailing label on the mail. So when you grew up, you just spelled it the way you thought it was spelled. You never saw your father spell it because you never saw any paperwork around the house that would indicate the correct spelling. So all those different Sizemores around town that are spelling their name two different ways are related. We're going to jump to the 19-teens and 1920s, which was a relatively calm period locally. I want to read you some of the things that were in the newspaper as far as big news involving law enforcement. This was one of the headlines in the Ruston Leader in 1919. There's very few newspapers from that particular period. In fact, you'll just find a handful of newspapers from Lincoln Parish before 1929. Everything after 1929 exists, but between the founding of the parish and 1929, there may be 10 or 12 newspapers still in existence. But in this 1919 article, the Ruston Leader reported, last Sunday, City Marshal Will Reisinger shot and killed a mad dog near the Kendall Hotel. The dog was frothing at the mouth and had killed a couple of cats and bitten another small dog. That was good news in 1919. Will Reisinger was one of the marshals / police chiefs. He served a very long time in the 19-teens into the 1920s. The first speeding tickets and traffic enforcement really didn't happen until the late 1920s. In 1929, Ruston's put up its first traffic lights. Most of those were on Vienna and Trenton. There was one at Bonner in Arizona, but the rest of them were at Vienna or Trenton Street intersections. They were turned on December 12th, 1929, and the first accident at a traffic light was December 13th, 1929. And somebody ran a red light. So that was also big news. That particular year, the budget of the police department was $9,000. That covered the salaries of the chief and probably a couple of officers, care of prisoners at the city jail, and any other expenses. So back then, the police chief was probably paid about $200 to $300 a month, and those salaries didn't change much until about 1950s or so. In the 1930s, the big deal were the gangsters. You had Dillinger and Babyface Nelson and all those rampaging across the country. Of course, the ones that are best known in this area are Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. And some of y'all may know the story about the kidnapping that took place here in Ruston. It's portrayed in the Bonnie and Clyde movie that came out in 1968, but it's totally different from what actually happened. In the movie, there's a couple sitting on a porch swing, kissing, and a car gets stolen, and they take off after it and end up being kidnapped when they actually catch up to their stolen car. What actually happened was a lady named Sophie Stone, who was the home demonstration agent for Lincoln Parish, was on a porch swing of a boarding house where she lived across from the current city hall. It would have been on the northeast corner of Trenton and Georgia, where the bank is now. That was called the Brooks Boarding House, which actually had been a house up the hill at the corner of Vienna in Georgia at one time, facing Vienna. And the family decided they wanted to move it, so they rolled it on logs down the hill to the Trenton and Georgia intersection, turning it as they went so they would face Trenton Street instead of coming down the hill backward. Well, it kind of got away from them and rolled a little closer to Trenton Street than they wanted it, but it ended up being a boarding house. It was a place where you really had to have your bona fides in order. I mean, it wasn't where, it wasn't a slumlord place. It was a place where, you had to have a little class to live there. Anyway, one of the occupants of the boarding house was Miss Stone. Another occupant was a Mr. Darby, who lived there with his family. He was married and had several children, and he was an undertaker. Anyway, Miss Stone is sitting on the porch swing during her lunch break when she sees a car coming down the street. There's a man on the running board of this car, and it slows down right there at the boarding house. The guy jumps off and jumps into Mr. Darby's car, which he's parked there while he's coming home for lunch. Jumps in Mr. Darby's car and takes off down the street. So Miss Stone goes inside to Mr. Darby, who's eating with his family, and said, "Is somebody supposed to take your car?" And he said, "No, they must be stealing." And there's been a rash of car thefts recently where teenagers were just joyriding. They take the car, take it a mile down the road and dump it somewhere. So they thought that was probably what was going on. So Miss Stone says, "Well, let's get in my car and catch up with them and try to stop them." So Miss Stone and Mr. Darby get in her car, take off up 167 North, trying to catch up to the stolen car, and make the mistake of catching it. When they caught the hill near Ico, the stolen car is sitting sideways in the road. So they stop there. Another car pulls up behind them. The car that pulls up behind them is Clyde Barra, Bonnie Parker, Buck Barra, who's Clyde's brother, Blanche Barra, who is Buck's wife. So there's four in there. The guy in the stolen car is a 17-year-old named W.D. Jones, who had fallen in with Bonnie and Clyde and had become part of their gang. So Bonnie and Clyde put Mr. Darby, and Miss Stone in the front seat of their car. So there's four of them in the front seat, and then Buck Barra and his wife in the back seat. They abused Miss Stone and Mr. Darby by roughing them up. Mr. Darby gets pistol whipped, so he's almost unconscious when they drag him and put him in the car. Anyway, they drive around to North Louisiana into Arkansas for several hours trying to do what, I don't know. But at one point, they passed a gas station where the Ruston police chief and mayor have stopped. Apparently they've got the word that this has happened, and they're gone looking for them. And so Bonnie and Clyde are coming by this service station, and they said, if this lawman recognize us or come after us, we're going to kill him. So they don't see them. The kidnappers continue on. Eventually, somewhere up near Hope, Arkansas, they pushed Miss Stone and Mr. Darby out of the car and leave them on the side of the road in the middle of the night. They do give them $5 so that they can find a way to get back home, pay somebody to take them to the nearest sheriff's office. Miss Stone, who later became Mrs. Harold Cook, was very upset when the movie came out in 1968. Not only did they portray her as smooching with her boyfriend on the porch swing when that was not the case, but that Bonnie and Clyde were treated as folk heroes instead of the thugs that they really were. I mean, they were roughed up, but, you know, when Miss Stone was pulled into the car, Bonnie Parker basically dragged her on the ground by the hair and threw her in the car. And they beat up Mr. Darby pretty good. But Miss Stone said that they basically were very happy-go-lucky. I mean, they had made jokes with Mr. Darby about being an undertaker that he could take care of them when they met their fate. Well, guess who was the undertaker that involved them? It was Mr. Darby at Congress Funeral Home in Arcadia when they were here not long after that. But the reason they stole that car was that they were going to go down the road and rob the Russell State Bank, which it was the biggest bank in town at that time. It was also a Lincoln Parish Bank, which was kind of across the street. The fact that they chased after them kind of broke up that band, but the Ruston Police Department put an officer upstairs in Russell State Bank. At that time, it had 2 floors, and you could look down into the lobby from that second floor. They put an officer up there with a shotgun for 2 weeks after that, just in case they came back. Of course, they did not come back. They did come back to the area and were killed in April 1934, just south of Gibson. The 1940s was a fairly quiet period for local law enforcement. I've got a photograph here that I'll pass around. Again, to give you a sense of what the police department looked like. This is from 1948. They had one patrol car, and then they had the mayor's car, which sometimes they also used. But they had one car. And from the 40s up until the late 60s, basically what happened is you would have one officer on foot downtown and one officer in the patrol car. And when a call came in to the police department at City Hall, the dispatcher would flip a switch. And on Trenton Street and on Diana Street downtown was a little blue light bulb that hung above the street. And when that switch was lit up with those light bulbs, the officer who was on foot patrol downtown would run back to City Hall. And the officer that was in the patrol car, who would be radioed as to what the call was, would come back to City Hall first, pick up the second officer, and then they would go answer the call. As you can imagine, that wasn't a very efficient system, but that was the procedure well up into the late 60s. When I started at the police department in 1977, those blue light bulbs were still hanging downtown. They eventually disappeared. That was a method of communication. But you tell them this photograph that's going around, they had dark uniforms. There's really no uniformity to them. Basically, every officer provided their own clothing, and you tell them that they don't really look alike other than the fact that they're all the same color. The 1950s marks the the first real progress in law enforcement trying to modernize. The patrol car got two-way radios for the first time. The very first radios, they could call the patrol car, but the patrol car couldn't call back. They were basically one-way communication. But the 1950s saw some progress. The chief, through most of the early 50s, was a man called Parish, who was really an outsider, the first outsider to hold any kind of chief law enforcement position in Lincoln Parish. But he was very progressive, bought equipment that the agency had never had before, really modernized things. In the mid-50s, he tried to resign, and that upset the mayor and city council so much that they gave him more money to stay. And he did stay a couple more years before finally resigning. He moved to Arkansas, where he worked for the Union County Sheriff's Office in L.A. for a while, and went for the Arkansas Attorney General's office. He was followed by Jesse Reiser as police chief, someone that many of y'all probably knew. Sheriff Reiser, our Chief Reiser, later became sheriff. He's probably one of the longest serving law enforcement officers in Lincoln Parish. During that period, he was probably the most recognizable person in Lincoln Parish. He knew everybody and everybody knew him. This is a photograph we have here at the museum when he was police chief. And this is later after he ran for sheriff and served for sheriff, I think, 20 years. So, like I said, between his tenure as working for the city of Ruston and as sheriff, one of the longest serving law enforcement officers.
Wesley, two of his daughters are here tonight. I'm sure you know that.
Oh, yes. So I said some comments later. Here's the time the sheriff Reiser was the sheriff's department. This is the decal that appeared on the door. You know, y'all see patrol cars now, they got all kinds of fancy markings. Basically, the patrol cars at the sheriff's office this time had one of these decals on each of the front doors, and what we call a bubble gum machine, red light on top, very simple look. And sometimes I wonder if that's not the best one, but it's the uniforms that they wore were a very simple khaki with a patch that was used by a lot of sheriff's offices in North Indiana. And that was the uniform for 20 or 30 years through Sheriff Reiser's tenure, and then Sheriff Simonton, and then when Wayne House was elected in 1980, he changed the uniform for the first time in 20 or 30 years to, I think at that time, it was brown pants, a khaki colored shirt, and then they were later changed to green pants and a tan looking shirt. Of course, now the sheriff's office wearing navy blue pants and a tan shirt. So there's been a lot of changes over the years in how uniforms look. This is a uniform that was worn by a state trooper here in Lincoln Parish in the late 50s, early 60s. And, this doesn't look anything like the blue uniforms they wear today. But it was actually a pretty sharp uniform. This is a very expensive uniform. This is wool, and you got the piping around the pockets and the epaulette. And that really increases the cost of the shirt. So, but it was by the state, so they could afford a little bit more expensive uniform. And about the same time, this is what the Ruston uniform looked like. Just basically a very cheap white shirt, and this is the first uniform patch that the town of Ruston used. It was designed by Mrs. Sonny Bernard, that many of y'all may have known, but it basically just says Louisiana at the top and then Ruston on the state and then police at the bottom. This was not used very long. Officers did not like wearing white shirts. What do you think that would be the case? Big target if you're prowling around in the backyard looking for a burglar or something in the middle of the night. He can see easily. So that's why most law enforcement nowadays wear dark uniforms so that they don't stand out as a target. They're searching for someone at night or in a burglarized building. This is a uniform jacket the Boston Police wore in the 60s up into the early 70s. The uniform pants were this gray color here with a lighter color shirt. What I call the cowboy uniform. Everybody wore cowboy boots and what I call the gunslinger gun belt. I mean, it was a filing tool, usually had designs on it. Officers tried to outdo each other in the fanciness of their rigs. Usually the gun, hanging halfway down to their knee. It's something that no agency would allow nowadays. And they wore a straw cowboy hat, so that was the look up until the early 1970s when Don Hammond became chief. And he's the chief that converted the uniform to what's now the traditional navy blue. The first uniform was navy blue with gray piping around the pockets. Eventually they would go to a solid navy blue uniform and still wear that today. Did our picture get all around the 1948? One other picture I forgot to show you earlier. That we have here at the museum. This is Eugene Howard. This usually hangs in the front parlor. He was sheriff in the 1880s. His father was also a sheriff, Edward Howard. Eugene Howard was also a deputy marshal in Diana, and most of the early law enforcement in Lincoln Parish were Confederate veterans. They had shown, I guess, what they could do during the war. Virtually anybody in government, politicians, elected officials, whatever, if you didn't serve in the war, you didn't have a chance of getting in public office. He served a good period, died in office. Most of the sheriffs in Lincoln Parish served multiple terms. I think only a couple served a single 4-year term. Most of them anywhere from 8 to 20 years. So once you got in office, if you did your job, you just about always got re-elected. Sheriff Reiser served as sheriff for 20 years. Sheriff Alf served from 1980 to 2004. And the current sheriff, Mike Stone, has served since 2004. So that shows you that their tenures are usually pretty lengthy. They stay until they're ready to go home. Okay, questions, stories, comments?
Question here.
Yes, sir.
Who was the last Lincoln Parish law officer to die on duty?
Well, there have been 3. They're all city officers. First one was Chief Sizemore. The next one was Officer Hal Posey. who was killed in 1941. He answered a call out here in Alabama, a disturbance call, which ended up actually being his brother-in-law. And Officer Posey and Officer Neal was with him, and they had encountered his brother-in-law at a cafe downtown, and he was drunk, and they basically sent him home. Well, he goes home and he starts some kind of disturbance, so the police are called in. They go up to the house, and Officer Neal goes to the front door, and Officer Posey's going around to the back door when he meets his brother-in-law on the side of the house. And the brother-in-law shoots and kills him, and then Officer Neal comes running around the house, and the guy tries to kill him as well, but his gun misfires. So he was arrested and spent the rest of his life in Angola. The last one killed was Sergeant Frank Croxton. I think that was 1978. He was involved in a car crash on Cedar Creek Drive. I think it was just called Kentucky at that time. The curve where you go off of Kentucky onto Cedar Creek Drive, left the roadway and crashed. And there was some reason to believe that he was trying to catch up to a vehicle and make a traffic stop, and that took place. But that was the last one. The city did have one shot and seriously wounded about 3 years ago. Also, Marcel Canty was shot investigating a suspicious vehicle. He was shot 2 or 3 times and has managed to recover from his wounds and come back to work. And his assailants were from Freeport. They were over here trying to break into cars. And we got out to check on them, and they were all arrested and convicted. Those 3 are the only city officers. There have been none killed at the sheriff's office. There's been 1 state trooper that was killed in a traffic accident in the late 70s. Any other comments?
Will the $2 of the law will be recognized?
Y'all got anything to say?
It was quite interesting to be brought up in a home where your daddy was the law officer. He knew everything we had done before we got here.
Martin, you want to say something? There's
No, I just had to walk on our straight line because daddy was the lawman all the time. Yes, you're right.
Any other questions or comments? I know somebody's got to have a story from back in the old days.
How long was O.O. Osborne?
How long was he chief? Well, he was actually an officer for quite a while before he became chief. Let me see what he became chief in 1956 and served in 1973.
The double O.
They call him Double O. Oliver O. Osborne.
No, it was triple O.
Triple O is what we call
He was police chief longer than anybody has ever been police chief.
Is there any connection with the tech police department? Were those 2 departments operating separately?
Those were separate. The tech police department was actually started, it was called Louisiana Tech Campus Security, but it was a full-fledged law enforcement agency. When the tech police started out, they were dirt poor, basically. They were given the state police uniforms, used hand-me-downs from state troopers was the uniform that they wore initially. The fact that they were called campus security made people think watchmen or security guards. So for a long time, they were not taken seriously. They were not A lot of people do not consider them a full-fledged law enforcement agency with arrest powers. So that made things difficult when you had to arrest somebody, they didn't think you had the authority. That's really where I started my career in law enforcement as a ticket writer and a dispatcher as a student with the Tech Police Department. It is obviously much, much different now. The police chief was Randall Hermes, who was city police chief for a long time, and it was a very professional organization, and they look like police officers now. They don't wear anything.
When I started Tech, there was one police officer, Mr. Colley, and he wasn't really a police officer, he just checked to see that all the doors were
All
locked.
right. I mean, even when I was working there as a student, when they were actually law enforcement officers, that was the big job, was to check doors at night to make sure all the facilities were locked up. But it was also pretty crazy back then. I mean, they spent a lot of time dealing with fraternity fights and drunk drivers and those kinds of things. It's actually quieter on the Tech campus now than it was in the 70s and 80s. And to a large extent, the city of Ruston too. I mean, when I worked for the city, sometimes the crowds at the bars downtown flooded out into 167. You'd have trucks backed up to blocks because they couldn't get through. You don't see anything like that nowadays. There's a different type of student in Louisiana Tech town that makes all the difference as to what happens behavior-wise in Ruston at night. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What determines, or how does a chain of command go from, say, a city or parish up to state control? When do the state police come in a chain of command or a hierarchy? Where does it differentiate? Say something happens, where does state police come in, or how do you get up into that higher rank?
The state constitution says that the sheriff is the chief law enforcement officer of the parish. But with that said, the sheriff's office very rarely is going to come into a municipality and take over something. Of course, they have authority inside of the municipality just like they do out in the parish, but they basically leave policing in the city of Ruston to the Ruston Police Department, and they handle everything outside. The state police have very specific responsibilities, and it's basically traffic enforcement, accident investigation, and they're also, by state law, the agency responsible for hazardous material incidents. The state police is not going to come in and take over a murder investigation or something like that. They will come in and assist if they're asked to. But let's say there's a murder in Ruston, that's the responsibility of the Ruston Police Department. The sheriff's office is not going to take that over. State police is not going to come in and take that over. So each agency has its own boundaries as far as jurisdiction and also restrictions on its authority as to what it can and can't do. Yes, sir.
I was told a number of years ago that the sheriff, of course, was the head police as far as the county goes and the parish goes. I was told the only person that could fire or get rid of me on the case of malfeasance whatever was the coroner. Right. Is that right?
Yes.
The coroner?
I don't know that has ever happened. I mean, I think there are very specific instances where that can be done, and I'm real familiar with that. But the coroner is the only one that has that authority.
I just wondered if it was still like that.
As far as I know, yes. Yes, ma'am.
Looking around this room, I see so many people that I went to high school with in the late 50s and early 60s. And trust me, your father did not have to be a chief of police or a sheriff in order for them to find out what you had done before you got home. Because most of us, our parents, knew all of the police in town. And the parents knew each other. And I can tell you, the one time that that some of us were rolling a car with toilet paper that we had stole from a filling station, my father knew it before I got home. And the police came by and we had to undo what we had done. But it's very different now than it was then.
But it is very different. A lot of the officers that are working here in Ruston, they're not born in Ruston, they're not from Ruston. It is very, very hard to find people that want to work in law enforcement. So, you know, there's been a lot of people come up in the police department and the sheriff's department whose fathers or grandfathers worked for those agencies, and that's just not the case anymore. Anybody else? We're pretty much out of time. I've got some copies of my book on Chief Sizemore, if anybody's interested in that. You see me a little bit. I appreciate y'all being here today.
You did a great job.